What if everything you think you know about Cleopatra is wrong? What if the woman history remembers as a seductress, a beautiful temptress who bewitched the most powerful men in the world, was actually something far more extraordinary than that? What if she was the most brilliant political mind of the ancient world, a linguist who spoke 9 languages, a military strategist, a goddess, a philosopher, a queen who ruled the wealthiest kingdom on earth and came closer than anyone in history to uniting the entire Mediterranean world under a single crown? This is Cleopatra VII, and this is her city. Alexandria, Egypt, 50 BC, the most magnificent, most cosmopolitan, most intellectually dazzling city on the face of the earth. A city of 1 million people, the largest in the known world. A city whose lighthouse could be seen from 50 miles out at sea. A city whose library contained the accumulated knowledge of every civilization that had ever existed. And at the center of all of it, a 20-year-old woman who had just seized the throne of Egypt by sheer force of will and genius. Today, we are going to walk through her world, her palace, her city, her life. And by the end of this video, you will never see Cleopatra the same way again. To understand Cleopatra, you first need to understand Alexandria, because Alexandria was unlike any city that had ever existed before it, or arguably since. It was founded in 331 BC by Alexander the Great himself, who personally mapped out its street plan before marching east to conquer the rest of the known world. He never came back, but his city outlived him by centuries, growing into something so extraordinary that visitors from across the ancient world described it with barely concealed awe. Imagine arriving by ship across the Mediterranean. You are still 50 miles from the Egyptian coast when you see it for the first time. Rising above the flat horizon, a tower of white marble so tall it seems impossible. The Lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Over 130 meters high. At its peak, a fire burns day and night, reflected and amplified by polished bronze mirrors so powerful that its beam can be seen from space if legend is to be believed. As your ship enters the great harbor, the scale of the city reveals itself slowly. 2 massive stone breakwaters frame the harbor entrance. Behind them, a waterfront of extraordinary beauty. Marble colonnades, temple facades, royal palaces, stretching for kilometers along the coastline. The smell of the city reaches you before you dock. Spices from Arabia, incense from Ethiopia, papyrus from the Nile Delta, the salt of the Mediterranean mixing with the warm, dry air blowing in from the desert. You have arrived in the greatest city on earth. 1/3 of Alexandria, an entire third of this enormous city, is the royal quarter. The Bruchion, a vast complex of palaces, temples, gardens, theaters, and administrative buildings that spreads along the entire eastern waterfront of the Great Harbor. It is here that Cleopatra lives, rules, and holds court. Her palace is beyond anything that exists anywhere else in the ancient world. Imagine floors of polished Egyptian alabaster, so smooth they reflect the ceiling above like still water. Walls covered with elaborate painted reliefs depicting the gods of Egypt alongside the gods of Greece. Ceilings of carved cedar wood brought from Lebanon. Columns of red Aswan granite 50 feet high. Rooms filled with objects from every corner of the known world. Chinese silk, Indian ivory, Persian gold, Roman glassware. And everywhere the symbols of divine power. Because Cleopatra is not merely a queen, she is a goddess. She presents herself publicly as the living embodiment of Isis, the most beloved goddess in the Egyptian pantheon. She dresses in the robes of Isis. She wears the crown of Isis. When she appears before her people, she appears not as a ruler asking for loyalty, but as a divine being demanding devotion. It works. But who is Cleopatra really? Here is what the historical sources actually tell us, and it is far more interesting than the Hollywood version. Cleopatra was not Egyptian by blood. She was Macedonian Greek, a descendant of Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals who claimed Egypt after Alexander's death. Her family had ruled Egypt for nearly 2 centuries, and in all that time, not one of them had bothered to learn the Egyptian language. Cleopatra was the first. She taught herself to speak Egyptian fluently, then Ethiopian, then Hebrew, then Aramaic, then Parthian, then the language of the Medes, then Arabic, then Latin. 9 languages in total, each one a political tool, a bridge to a people, a demonstration of respect that her predecessors had never shown. When Cleopatra spoke to an Egyptian priest, she spoke in his language. When she received an Ethiopian ambassador, she greeted him in his tongue. The effect was electric. After generations of Greek rulers who treated Egypt as a conquered territory, here was a queen who actually saw her people. And her intelligence went beyond languages. Ancient sources describe her deeply versed in mathematics, philosophy, astronomy, and medicine. She wrote treatises on weights and measures and on the properties of medicinal plants. She studied with the scholars of the museum, Alexandria's great research institution that attracted the finest minds in the ancient world. This was not a woman defined by her beauty. This was a woman defined by her mind. And speaking of minds, we cannot talk about Cleopatra's Alexandria without talking about the library. The Great Library of Alexandria, the most famous institution in the history of human knowledge. At its peak, the library contained between 400,000 and 700,000 individual scrolls, representing virtually every significant work of literature, science, mathematics, philosophy, and history produced by every civilization in the known world. Homer, Euclid, Archimedes, Aristotle, Herodotus, Hippocrates, Sophocles, works that no longer exist anywhere on Earth, known only because ancient writers referenced them before they were lost forever. The library was not just a storage facility, it was a living research institution. Scholars from across the Mediterranean came to Alexandria specifically to work there. They were fed, housed, and paid by the Egyptian state. In return, they produced some of the most significant intellectual work of the ancient world. Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth here and got it almost exactly right in 240 BC, 2,000 years before modern science confirmed his figures. Herophilus performed the first systematic dissections of the human body here, laying the foundations of modern anatomy. Aristarchus proposed that the Earth orbited the Sun here 17 centuries before Copernicus made the same argument. This was the intellectual heart of the ancient world, and it was Cleopatra's backyard. Now we come to the part of Cleopatra's story that history has most distorted, her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. In 48 BC, Cleopatra is 21 years old. She has been driven out of Alexandria by her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, who has seized the throne with the help of his advisors. She is camped in the desert with a small army, plotting her return. Julius Caesar arrives in Alexandria, the most powerful man in the Roman world, and Cleopatra makes a decision that is pure political genius. She has herself smuggled into Caesar's quarters inside a rolled carpet, or, according to some sources, a linen sack. She emerges before him unannounced, alone, completely in his power. It is one of the most audacious political gambits in history, and it works perfectly. Caesar is captivated, not merely by her appearance, but by her intelligence, her wit, her absolute self-possession in a situation where most people would be trembling with fear. Within days, he has taken her side in the civil war against her brother. Within weeks, Egyptian forces loyal to Ptolemy XIII are defeated. Cleopatra is restored to her throne. Their alliance produces a son, Caesarion, whom Cleopatra presents to the world as the son of a god. Julius Caesar, after all, claimed descent from Venus herself. After Caesar's assassination in 46 BC, Cleopatra transfers her alliance to Mark Antony, Caesar's most powerful successor. Their relationship is one of the great partnerships in history. Together, they control Egypt, the Eastern Mediterranean, and significant portions of the Roman world. Together, they have 3 children. Together, they dream of something extraordinary, a new empire, combining the wealth of Egypt with the military power of Rome, centered not in Rome, but in Alexandria. It almost worked. For over a decade, Cleopatra and Antony ruled the Eastern Mediterranean as joint monarchs. Their court in Alexandria was the most glamorous, most intellectually vibrant, most politically significant in the world. Kings and queens from across the region came to pay their respects. But in Rome, a young man named Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and Antony's rival, was watching, and he was patient. In 31 BC, Octavian's fleet met the combined forces of Cleopatra and Antony at the Battle of Actium. It was the decisive moment. Antony's forces collapsed. The dream of a new empire died in the waters off the Greek coast. Antony took his own life in Alexandria shortly after, dying in Cleopatra's arms. And Cleopatra, the most powerful woman in the ancient world, faced the final act of her extraordinary life. Octavian arrived in Alexandria. He wanted Cleopatra alive, to parade her through the streets of Rome in chains as the ultimate symbol of his victory, the ultimate humiliation of the ultimate queen. Cleopatra refused. On August 12, 30 BC, at the age of 39, Cleopatra VII took her own life.
The exact method is debated by historians. The famous asp may be legend rather than fact, but the choice was entirely hers, on her own terms, in her own palace, in her own city. She was the last pharaoh of Egypt. After her death, Egypt became a Roman province. The 3,000-year-old civilization of the pharaohs, one of the greatest in human history, was over. And Alexandria, her magnificent, impossible, luminous city, began its long, slow decline. The library burned, the lighthouse crumbled, the royal quarter sank beneath the waters of the harbor, where it remains to this day, visible to divers, but forever beyond our reach. But Cleopatra herself endures, not because she was beautiful, not because she loved powerful men, but because she was extraordinary, because she looked at a world designed to exclude her, as a woman, as a ruler, as the last defender of a dying civilization, and she refused to accept its terms. She learned 9 languages when 1 would have sufficed. She studied philosophy when queens were expected to attend banquets. She walked into Julius Caesar's quarters alone and unarmed, and walked out with an empire. History called her a seductress. She was a strategist, a scholar, a goddess, a queen. And Alexandria, still sleeping beneath the waters of its ancient harbor, was her greatest monument. If Cleopatra's story moved you today, hit subscribe, because next week we go somewhere even more extraordinary.